So our whole thing was to try to change the color and the image of black women in television to make it more reality to me. So I had an opportunity with Good Times.
6'2", shoulders out to here, and a smile that lit up the night, and he mugged me.
February 17, 2020. Tragedy struck Hollywood. Ja'net Dubois, the talented actress, singer, and writer, took her last breath at her home in Glendale, California. The woman who had once made millions laugh and cry as Willona Woods in the legendary sitcom Good Times was gone. Forever. Leaving behind a void that could never be filled. Everyone thought the Good Times family would gather in full at her funeral. But they didn't. They were entirely absent, silent in a way that was frightening. Why did a cast once bonded like family completely disappear? Was it backstage drama? A bitter farewell? Fiery legal disputes? What made the TV family turn their backs at the very last moment of Ja'net Dubois' life? The truth is about to be revealed. Ja'net Dubois was born in the 1930s in a modest family in Brooklyn, New York. She grew up in an America still riddled with injustice, where opportunities for black women were almost non-existent. Her childhood was not paved in red carpets, but nurtured by dreams many considered impossible to become an artist. To enter the world of theater, Dubois had to fight against deep-rooted prejudice. That resilience carried her to Broadway, where every ounce of talent had to be proven through sweat and tears. From Broadway, Dubois moved on to television. She became one of the rare black actresses to appear in the daytime soap Love of Life in the late 1960s. It was a groundbreaking step at a time when black representation on American screens was nearly invisible. For Dubois, just being seen on TV was already a victory. She also left her mark in music. She co-wrote and performed the theme song Movin' On Up for the sitcom The Jeffersons. That tune became an anthem of ambition and progress for African Americans in the 1970s, and to this day it lives on as cultural legacy. But Dubois did not stop there. She went on to prove herself in many other roles. She won 2 Emmy Awards for her voice work in the PJs and appeared in numerous films and television series. However, the role that defined Ja'net Dubois' career was Good Times. In 1974, she stepped into the part of Willona Woods, the Evans family's neighbor in the iconic sitcom. While many female characters on TV at that time were still confined to being mothers or wives, Dubois' Willona broke the mold, bold, modern, and magnetic. She turned the character into more than a sitcom role. Willona became a pop culture icon forever tied to Ja'net Dubois' name. In Good Times, Ja'net Dubois and Janet Jackson were bonded as mother and daughter, with Willona adopting the abandoned Penny. But what the audience didn't expect was that their bond extended beyond the script. Off-screen, Dubois became an aunt and a spiritual mother to Janet, guiding the young girl into the harsh world of show business. Years later, Janet Jackson admitted with emotion, "She was like a second mother to me, the one who taught me to break free of stereotypes and believe in myself." That became Ja'net Dubois' greatest legacy, inspiring the next generation. In the 1970s, Good Times was promoted as a historic milestone, the first black family sitcom, a breakthrough representation of African American life on television. But that was only what audiences saw on screen. Behind the scenes, the atmosphere was entirely different. Bitter arguments, sudden departures, even lawsuits among the production team. The so-called TV family of Good Times gradually fractured, leaving cracks that would last for decades. Behind the laughter, the conflicts that tore apart the Good Times family. The first crack, the father who disappeared, John Amos, in Good Times. John Amos played James Evans, the strong father figure, the moral compass, the rock of the family. His portrayal of James Evans as a responsible, loving black father during the difficult 1970s became iconic. Viewers saw him as the backbone of the show, but behind the spotlight, a storm was brewing. John Amos openly voiced his concerns that the scripts of Good Times were losing their integrity. He believed the writers were turning black life into a string of cheap jokes rather than reflecting the painful reality outside. The storylines were too shallow, too frivolous. Amos wanted the show to be more socially conscious, a sitcom that entertained, but also carried responsibility. The problem was that Amos wasn't the type to play politics. He was blunt, so blunt that it made everyone uncomfortable. In an interview years later, Amos himself admitted, "I spoke too directly. I didn't know how to soften it, and that cost me." Tensions escalated. CBS and the production team made a move no one expected. They killed off James Evans. In season 4, audiences suddenly learned that James had died in a car accident while working out of town. There was no death scene on screen, no final goodbye from the character, just an off-screen death. Fans were shocked. America was stunned. Letters poured into CBS and countless headlines asked, "Why did Good Times kill the father that everyone loved?" For many fans, this was the first sign that the Good Times family was far from perfect. Amos left the show in bitterness. He chose to stand by principle rather than bow to what he saw as scripts that demeaned the black community. But the price was steep. He lost one of the most defining roles of his career, and Good Times lost its father, the soul of the family. That was the first crack, and also the deepest one. Because from the moment James Evans disappeared, the Good Times family on screen was forever missing its father. And off-screen, the cast and crew had already splintered into pieces. The second crack. The mother who fought back, Esther Rolle. If John Amos was the pillar of the Evans family, then Esther Rolle was its heart. As Florida Evans, the mother Rolle embodied the image of the black woman carrying the burden of survival while fiercely protecting the values of family. Audiences across America loved Florida not only because she cared for her children, but because she maintained dignity, even in poverty. But like Amos, Rolle did not hesitate to clash with the producers. She believed Good Times was created to truthfully reflect social issues, poverty, injustice, racism. Yet after only a few seasons, she realized the scripts were being steered away. The focus of the Evans family was increasingly shifted to JJ, the mischievous son whose antics and catchphrase, "Dynamite," had become a cultural sensation. America laughed, ratings soared, but Esther Rolle was not pleased. In an interview, she bluntly stated, "I do not want a black boy who is just stupid, not educated, just there to get laughs. That demeans our community." For Rolle, JJ had become a stereotype distorting the original purpose of the show. Tensions exploded. After John Amos was removed, Rolle became the last one willing to stand up. In 1977, she made a shocking decision to leave Good Times at the very height of her stardom. It was a devastating blow to CBS. With the father already gone now, the mother on screen had vanished too. The series lost both of its anchors. Good Times plunged into crisis. And just as predicted, ratings collapsed after Esther Rolle's exit at the end of season 4. By season 5, 1977, 1978, the show had fallen to number 29 in the Nielsen ratings, losing millions of viewers compared to its peak when both James Evans and Florida Evans were still present. No one could fill the void that Florida Evans left behind. Audiences lost faith and critics pointed fingers at the producers. What are they doing to the Evans family? CBS was forced to back down. After a series of negotiations in 1978, Esther Rolle returned. But this time she did not come back in weakness. She came back like a queen setting conditions. She demanded a proper raise. The scripts had to improve, less shallow, more socially aware. JJ had to change, no longer a useless clown, but more mature and responsible. CBS agreed to everything. Florida Evans returned to the screen, but audiences could see the truth. The Good Times family behind the scenes had already fractured. A family that could only hold together when ratings were on the brink of collapse. Rolle's exit and return exposed a raw truth. Behind the laughter of this legendary sitcom were brutal power struggles, where actors and producers were no longer partners, but opposing sides. The third crack, the rating star, and the wall of silence, Jimmie Walker. If John Amos was the backbone and Esther Rolle was the heart, then Jimmie Walker as JJ Evans was the unexpected ratings bomb. With his lanky frame, goofy grin, and the catchphrase "Dynamite" shouted every episode, JJ quickly became a cultural phenomenon of the 1970s. The truth is, from its very first season, Good Times was only expected to be a modest family sitcom. But within just a few episodes, ratings skyrocketed, largely thanks to JJ. His "Dynamite" slogan spread across America, printed on t-shirts, posters, even becoming street slang. CBS knew they had struck a ratings goldmine. The problem, that goldmine, was a double-edged sword. As the writers began shaping the show more and more around JJ, the other characters originally created to portray the struggles and resilience of a black family were pushed aside. John Amos publicly criticized that the show was turning JJ into a buffoon. Esther Rolle bluntly added, "A stupid, irresponsible black boy is not the image I want representing our community." Meanwhile, Jimmie Walker lived a paradox. On screen, they were a family. Off-screen, Jimmie wasn't close to his co-stars at all. In later interviews, Walker revealed, "All those years on Good Times, Esther Rolle and I barely spoke. Same with John Amos. There were no fights, no yelling, just silence. A cold silence blanketed the set. When the cameras rolled, they acted as a loving family. When the cameras stopped, they withdrew to separate corners, strangers once more. The tension deepened when Amos was fired, then Rolle left. JJ became CBS's one star, but that only widened the rift between Walker and the rest of the cast. The ratings told the story of that paradox. From 1974 to 1976, Good Times often ranked in America's top 10 shows, fueled by JJ's popularity. But by season 5, with Rolle gone and storylines leaning too heavily on JJ, ratings plummeted into the top 30. Audiences grew tired of repetitive antics, while the family values, the core of Good Times, faded away. Jimmie Walker had become a ratings icon, but also the symbol of division. And in that chaos, one figure who seemed like an outsider suddenly got caught in the storm: Willona Woods and Ja'net Dubois' awkward position. Willona Woods, the sharp-tongued neighbor with fiery fashion and a smile bright enough to light up an entire room. At first, Willona was sketched as a side character, the funny neighbor popping in for a few minutes to add humor. But when Ja'net Dubois stepped into the role, the character stole the spotlight. Audiences went wild for Willona, who became a new symbol of black womanhood, independent, free, unafraid to love, unafraid to live for herself, an image rarely seen on American television in the 1970s. Viewers adored her so much that every time the Evans front door opened, they eagerly waited for Willona to walk in the spice that made the show whole. But that same spotlight put Dubois in a paradoxical, uncomfortable position. On screen, she was the beloved neighbor tied closely to the Evans family. Off-screen, her growing popularity made her a sensitive figure. Rumors spread that Esther Rolle, strict and traditional, wasn't particularly close to Dubois. Meanwhile, Jimmie Walker, the ratings star, resented anyone who stole attention. Dubois never complained publicly, but in one interview she admitted in the 22 minutes of an episode it was hard for Willona to develop much more. But audiences loved her, and that's what kept me there. A gentle comment, but everyone understood the bitterness beneath it. She wanted more, but was constrained by scripts held at a distance by her co-stars and trapped in a fractured cast. Ironically, Willona Woods, the side character at first, became the mirror reflecting the show's backstage tragedy, dazzling on screen, but isolated within the very family she was tied to. Just as Good Times was drowning in backstage disputes, another bomb suddenly exploded, and this time, it came from the show's very own co-creator. The Eric Monte lawsuit, a bombshell that shook Hollywood. Eric Monte, a young writer from Chicago, was once a rising star. Alongside Mike Evans, who played Lionel on The Jeffersons, he was among the first black creatives to help shape major sitcoms on American television. Monte not only co-created Good Times, but also originated the ideas for The Jeffersons and What's Happening. For him, this wasn't just a career, it was a mission to put the black voice on screen. But then Monte realized a brutal truth. The very shows he had helped create were being stripped from him. Norman Lear, the legendary producer and sitcom mogul of the 1970s, along with CBS, continued to profit from his ideas while Monte's name was erased, and the rewards went to others. In 1977, Monte made a move no one expected. He filed a lawsuit against Norman Lear, CBS, ABC, and the networks involved, accusing them of stealing his ideas and exploiting his work. The lawsuit sent shockwaves through Hollywood. Headlines called it a David vs. Goliath case, a relatively unknown black writer daring to take on the most powerful television empire in America. Monte was fearless. "I created these shows. They stole from me, and I want justice." After years of legal battle, the outcome stunned the industry. Monte won, at least in part. He was awarded about $1 million in compensation plus residuals. On paper, it looked like a victory. In reality, it was a sentence that buried his career. Hollywood does not forgive those who challenge the system. After the lawsuit doors slammed shut, Monte was blacklisted, no longer given the chance to write for major sitcoms. His career plummeted, eventually spiraling into poverty and addiction. Years later, newspapers published bitter interviews with him describing how he lived in shelters for the homeless. But the echoes of his lawsuit remained. It revealed a painful truth. Good Times, the show once promoted as a pioneering black family sitcom, was actually born from bitterness, creative disputes, and Hollywood's silent injustices. The Eric Monte bombshell didn't just explode in court. It shattered the illusion of unity within the so-called Good Times family, the rift that endured. After the show ended, when Good Times wrapped in 1979, many fans hoped that the cracks behind the scenes would finally fade away. But the truth was the complete opposite. On television, they had been a pioneering black family bonded warm-loving. Off-screen, the distance grew clearer by the day. The cast rarely reunited. Public gatherings were almost non-existent, and even joint interviews became scarce. Each walked their own path as if the Evans family had never truly existed outside the screen. After leaving Good Times, John Amos didn't vanish from Hollywood. He continued working in film and television, most notably in Roots 1977, and later Coming to America 1988. But with CBS, Amos had virtually severed ties. In interviews, he rarely spoke of Good Times with joy. Instead, he recalled the creative clashes with CBS as a bitter lesson in the cost of speaking the truth. For him, James Evans, the role that made his name, was also the scar of his career. Esther Rolle, the mother Florida Evans, after leaving the show and briefly returning, eventually stepped away from the screen quietly. She passed away in 1998 at the age of 78. Notably, when fans expected her memorial to bring a reunion of the cast, it never happened. No on-stage reconciliation, no heartfelt embraces to close the chapter of stormy years. That silence only underscored a distance that had never healed. Meanwhile, Jimmie Walker, once the breakout star with the catchphrase "Dynamite," chose a brutally blunt honesty. In interviews, he stated plainly, "Esther and I never talked much." Same with John Amos. "We were not a family, we were co-workers." A short sentence, but one that slashed apart the beautiful illusion fans had held for decades that Good Times was a real family. Ja'net Dubois, for her part, kept a reserved composure. She continued with other television projects, voiced characters in the PJs, and even won an Emmy, but rarely appeared alongside her former castmates. On the rare occasions she mentioned Good Times, her words were brief, as though unwilling to reopen a chapter filled with wounds. Scattered interviews over the years painted a cold reality: the gap was never closed. No warm reunions, no full cast gatherings to celebrate the legacy. Only silence stretching across decades. The Good Times family never truly existed. The final moment, Ja'net Dubois' funeral, and the haunting absence. On February 17, 2020, Hollywood was stunned by heartbreaking news. Ja'net Dubois, the woman who made millions laugh as Willona Woods, passed away quietly in her Glendale, California home. She died in her sleep, a peaceful yet sudden end at the age of 74. The coroner's report revealed the cause: cardiac arrest from complications of chronic high blood pressure and coronary artery disease. Illnesses Dubois had carried silently for years, never showing them to the public. To fans, she was always the vibrant, radiant Willona. No one imagined that behind that dazzling smile was a heart that had long grown weary. And then came the funeral, a memorial for a woman who had become an icon. Fans expected to see the Good Times cast, the faces once called a television family, gathered together united in honoring the legendary neighbor they all loved. But they didn't. The funeral unfolded in silence. No John Amos, no Jimmie Walker. Esther Rolle had already passed in 1998. There was no reunion, no final embrace of the Evans family at Willona's farewell. The absence hung heavy, turning the air colder, cutting into the memories of fans like a wound. The media and the public couldn't help but ask, why had the conflicts of the 1970s, the silence, the fractures that were never mended, left a distance so deep that not even death could bring them back together, not even for one last goodbye? Public reaction and outcry. The moment news of Ja'net Dubois' passing broke, a wave of grief swept across the media and social networks. It wasn't only fans, even those who had worked closely with her spoke publicly about the pain of losing her. Janet Jackson, who played Little Penny, the foster daughter of Willona in Good Times, posted a deeply emotional tribute. "I saw firsthand how she broke stereotypes, inspired young girls like me, and became a true role model. Ja'net was like a mother to me, a teacher, a friend. I will miss you deeply." Janet's words brought tears to the public's eyes. Because they were more than a tribute, they were proof of the real mother-daughter bond Dubois had built with Jackson off-screen. Bernadette Stanis, who played Thelma, the Evans family's eldest daughter, also shared her grief. "We grew up together on that set. Ja'net always made me laugh, always gave me advice. She was family." But while old castmates sent heartfelt messages online, the public noticed one shocking detail: none of them appeared at the funeral. On Twitter, Facebook, and forums everywhere, questions exploded. Why wasn't the Good Times cast at her funeral? How can they call her family on screen, but not show up for her in the end? We loved them as a family, but maybe it was never real. The media pressed for answers, but none came. No official explanation. No statement from CBS or the old production team. Only a cold silence, and that silence itself became a haunting mystery. An icon was gone. The people once called her family sent only words, not presents. And what lingered in the hearts of the public was not just sadness, but a question that has never been answered. When people remember Ja'net Dubois, they think of Willona Woods, the stylish, fiery neighbor in Good Times. But beyond the spotlight, Dubois lived a personal journey filled with highs and lows, and left behind a remarkable legacy. Ja'net Dubois, a legacy beyond wealth. A life that endures. In Hollywood, not everyone is defined by extreme wealth. Ja'net Dubois was no billionaire, yet she still held a respectable net worth estimated at about $2 million at the time of her passing in 2020. But what made Dubois unforgettable was never the size of her bank account. It was the way she built a diverse, resilient career and left behind a legacy no price tag could measure. Her income came from many paths: television and film acting, music, animation, and voice work. Compared to stars worth hundreds of millions, Dubois' estate may have seemed modest. But she provided her children with stability, and more importantly, she gave the public something priceless, an immortal name in American cultural history. To audiences, Ja'net Dubois was not a wealthy star, but the eternal Willona Woods, and the unforgettable voice behind the Jeffersons. On screen, Willona Woods stood as an independent black woman, free and self-reliant. Off-screen, Dubois lived the same way, strong, self-sufficient, yet carrying private pains she never paraded before the world. Her personal life: 4 children and a wound that never healed. She was the mother of 4 children: Ronnie Dubois, Jovan Berghart, and Raj Christo. Among them, Ronnie delighted fans with her brief appearance in Good Times, playing Thelma's classmate, a sweet moment where motherhood and career intersected on screen. It showed how much Ja'net loved her children, not only shining on her own, but guiding them closer to the arts. But life was not without heartbreak. In 1987, Ja'net Dubois faced the greatest tragedy of her life. Her son Raj Christo passed away from cancer at just 36. Friends said that while she maintained her calm grace and radiant smile in public, inside, she carried a void nothing could fill. It was a wound she bore until the end of her days, a wound only a mother who has lost a child can truly understand. As for marriage, Dubois chose silence. No tabloid scandals, no public displays of romance. Some sources claim she married and later divorced, but she never revealed the identity of her husband. Perhaps she wanted to keep a clear boundary on screen. She was the dazzling Willona. In real life, she was simply a mother, raising her children, working and living quietly. Throughout her life, Ja'net Dubois embodied the same spirit as her character, a woman who stood firm after storms, raised her children on her own, built a career with dignity, and avoided the noise of messy love affairs. People loved her for her talent, but admired her even more for the grace with which she faced both stardom and the deepest heartbreak. A true legacy, beyond the million-dollar figure. Looking back, the $2 million estate is only the tip of the iceberg. The greatest legacy Ja'net Dubois left was the image of a strong, independent black woman who broke stereotypes. She was Willona, the free spirit of 1970s television. She was the voice of the Jeffersons, the theme that opened millions of family evenings. She was a mother who knew both joy and the crushing pain of loss. And she was Janet Jackson's spiritual mother, proof that sometimes on-screen bonds can become real family ties. For the public, Ja'net Dubois left more than laughter and timeless music. She left a reminder the greatest wealth an artist has is not in the bank, but in the hearts of the people they touch.
All data, analysis, and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast.
There is still so much more to explore: stories of resilience, legacy, and truth. Feel free to dive into some of our top recommended videos now appearing on your screen.